On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Aruneesh Salhotra. He is the global head of application security at Nomura. And also, he actually has his own company, S&M Consulting, where he is an advisor and fractional CISO to organizations. We're going to be talking about the future of attack surface management. We're going to be talking about how there's additional risk with shadow IT, the domain of ASM, and some of the functional elements. I think it's going to be really interesting to educate everyone on the differences between ASM and other components in security. I'm excited, Aruneesh, to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to share about ASM and then my journey itself in the process.
Absolutely. I guess it's just a high level. If you could just let everyone know, what does Nomura do? And also, what are some of your responsibilities as global head of application security?
So Nomura is a Japanese investment bank. It's actually operates in multiple areas. Of course, it's a Japanese bank, so you have retail operations in Japan, but it has operations in other regions where it's primarily wealth management, investment banking in other regions. And I'm based out of New York office. And like you said, I definitely work in the application security space, but I also have work as a fractional CISO for my own consulting, where I advise different organizations how to set up security programs, not just cloud or application, but in general, right? And over the years, I've helped numerous organizations with their cloud assessments, whether it's AWS or Azure, helping another organization to help set up an open source program office. There are functional elements for how you actually, your consumption model for an open source. And there are a few other things that I do on the side. And I serve on a couple of advisory boards for new cybersecurity startups.
Awesome. You definitely keep busy, and you got deep expertise within the space. So I'm excited to have you on. So we're going to be talking about attack surface management and some of the risks, visibility. I guess at the highest level, tell us what attack surface management is.
So attack surface management is sort of like giving you a map of what your assets are and what are the point of entries that an attacker could typically have, right? Think of a simple example. If you have a house and you have doors and windows, right? So your doors and windows and maybe your attic kind of forms from an entry point, right? Some are more secure, some are not very secure. If you look at windows in the basement or maybe in the bedrooms, you might be protecting all your doors with sensors and other things that you have, right? But looking at your attic and maybe windows, those can typically be your weakest point, right? So attack surface management is somewhat similar. If you take an analogy that you might have a website that you're hosting on behalf of your organization, where you're getting users to log into the system and assume that your site is susceptible to a SQL injection, for example, taking the most basic example. That becomes your a single point of failure or a weak point, right? So attack surface management itself is what it's doing is discovering all your assets, mostly outward facing, and try to create an inventory and then try to figure out what are the weaknesses that exist on those assets and what you as an organization to do in order to reduce the risk. And attack surface management really does not stop in your web application, right? It also extends in other areas. For example, if you're posting your source code on GitHub or GitLab in a public repository, that itself is you're actually putting your IP in a different setting itself, right? So you have to actually take that into account. And if you're storing your secrets in a vault, or you have your data stored in Box, Dropbox, and other online services, that also kind of extends the definition of ASM.
Awesome. I guess, when I'm listening about ASM and I'm starting to think about the growth of SaaS applications within the company, and keeping track of all the different possible risks. Obviously, the thought of shadow IT comes to mind. How big of a risk is that when looking at attack surface management?
Well, I like to use, I'm probably paraphrasing somebody else. It's basically, you can only protect what you know of, right? And based on the current trends in the industry itself, there is a lot of emphasis on automation. And if you're building automation and relying on, say, a single source of truth, whether it's a ServiceNow or any other CMDB that you have within the organization, your automation kind of depends on that one, right? So it's very important that your the single source of truth itself is pristine, it's accurate, and it's reliable, right? So it's very important that whatever solution that you are bringing in to actually ensuring you have like a complete and accurate view of your organization and your assets, you should be looking at multiple features, mainly your discovery and inventory, and then everything else follows after that.
And as you're kind of looking at increased cloud adoption, and obviously, like you mentioned, some of these externally facing assets, why is that visibility becoming even more important? What is the main focus?
So I would say like visibility into externally facing assets is crucial for organizations, and especially because of increased adoption of cloud containers itself, right? And because the cloud environment typically have a broader and maybe more dynamic attack surface. Unlike your on-prem environments, cloud often involves multiple third-party and vendors, which kind of create more points of entry for attackers to exploit. I mean, it's taking the same analogy of your house itself, right? Let's say you're having one house and suddenly you have another house and you have another property. So your number of combinations and things that you have to think about increases by factor of X, right? So
when you're looking at, I guess, it sounds like a lot of, work behind the scenes to really go through the process and have the right tool in place to make sure you got that visibility. Is this heavily tool dependent? Is this heavily IP internally development? How do you actually operationalize some of the facets of attack surface management?
I think from an ASM perspective, that has all three factors, right? Your process, people, and technology, right? There are different elements with a different weightage, I would say. The people aspect is definitely there, and reliance on technology to ensure like the most of the mundane tasks and the human tasks that can be automated. Definitely you need tools for that. Then you need to have like a process around like from start to finish, right? Let's say you have a process to do a discovery, and once you find like a gap, for example, where do you go from there, right? How do you ensure your CMDB is 100%? And once you have the complete inventory, you also have to actually figure out what are the vulnerabilities that exist on those assets, right? Whether it's your application, your APIs, your website, your data sitting outside, right? So there needs to be a process defined. If you find an issue, right, how do you actually put that back into your vulnerability management program?
When it comes to ASM, obviously it seems like you touch on different areas of technology business. What does a team typically look like that is responsible for ASM?
So in terms of the team that are involved within the ASM program, I would say like those are not a great deal different from existing programs, whether it's application security or a VM program or your risk and compliance, right? All those teams kind of play a part in this. Definitely your VM program or the VM team itself is responsible for ensuring once an issue is identified for an existing or a newly discovered asset, there needs to be issue triaging that needs to happen. Like an issue ticket needs to be cut out and then that needs to be fixed, right? And the risk and compliance also needs to actually weigh in on the severity of the issue, right? Let's say there is a new asset that was recently discovered and it has like a high severity issue. So you have to actually see, okay, do I fix this particular issue against the other backlog that I have? So there needs to be a risk-based approach or a risk quantification to decide which one you actually tackle first, right? And of course, there are other teams, whether it's from a data security or source code or business, where let's say your IP was compromised or it potentially can be compromised. That business also plays a role in that. So it's not very different, but I think it's a new way of looking at your different attack paths that attackers can take, and you put like a program around that one. And another thing that's going to be important for the ASM success of the ASM program is clearly defining your AC model, right? Exactly defining the roles and responsibilities for each and every team, right? Like how do you go from point of detection to point of fixing, right?
Where does pen testing fit within ASM?
Again, with the pen testing, it's only as good as what it knows about, right? Like you give a pen testing organization a list of applications that you want to actually test again, but attack surface management takes a holistic approach and saying, okay, I'm going to discover all your assets on that, and based on the information that I'm gathering, your pen testing scope is sort of limited in that, and pen testing is usually geared towards protecting your critical assets. But what ASM is really doing is trying to make sure like there are no shadow IT that exists within your organization, which is like a big issue. Let's say you have like a trading application sitting on a desktop under somebody's desk, right? Which say it's outward facing. You have no idea that a DNS entry was created. So you have to actually ensure you have 100% view before it actually goes out the door to a pen testing organization. So I would say like both ASM and pen testing are complementary to each other.
And I guess, as you've seen things, move forward with, dynamic application security testing, continuous DAST, and you're seeing that kind of grow from that standpoint. How does that, I guess, what does that offer in the ASM world?
Similar to like pen testing, DAST is again like complementary to ASM itself. And of course, ASM itself is a growing space itself. And what I foresee the ASM growing into is having an end-to-end process within the ASM. So you might not have reliance on having another DAST solution if you can actually have the DAST functionality integrate into your ASM platform. Because essentially what ASM, if you take like a step-by-step approach, you're actually discovering and creating a finite inventory. And then you are actually looking at what are the vulnerabilities that exist on those assets and how to actually test and validate those things before those are fixed and after they are fixed, right? And if you look at DAST itself, DAST is doing OWASP top 10 or OWASP API top 10 in its right spirit itself, right? That aspect can easily be incorporated into the ASM platforms. And I would say in the next maybe 2 to 3 years, most of the ASM platforms that we have, they would probably start offering like a DAST functionality out of the box.
I guess like as you're starting to, when I'm listening to you talk about ASM and continuous DAST and obviously the complementary nature of that and pen testing, how does, I guess, ASM and continuous DAST, because it sounds like there's a potential complementary fit of how this might morph into the future. What are your views on what's going to happen down the road?
I would take like a very simple example. So let's say you have like an organization with 10 assets which are exposed outside. Let's say 9 are API and 1 is a website. And as part of ASM, you discovered another website that was not part of your purview, or you didn't even know about that one. So when it's exposed, there are 2 options that you have. Most of the organizers would say, the moment I detect like a shadow IT, I'm going to bring it down. And that's one approach. The other one is I'm going to continue leveraging that one, but I'm going to actually put like a continuous DAST behind the scenes, where the moment an asset is discovered, I'm going to actually do some sort of a test validation, like some sort of a continuous DAST on that discovered asset. And I'm going to project out or detect any vulnerability that exists in that platform, whether it's related to your web server, whether it's related to the application code itself, or maybe the API, there is a broken API, for example, around authentication. So you're kind of tying all these pieces together rather than having like two different solutions. You're kind of bringing them together, and maybe there is an option of like merging these two together. And that's exactly where I think more the industry is moving, or rather like should move, because there is no point of having two complementary solutions like exist in isolation.
I guess as you're kind of looking at your what you need to do to stay up to date, what you need to do to stay current within the ASM world, what are some of your best practices that you look at?
Yeah, I think from ASM itself, ASM definitely is a new capability that's being offered by different platforms. There are like a lot of vendors in that particular space which have like a decent amount of implementation. So from a best practice itself, definitely have a defined RACI model where you have a understanding of what do you do when something is detected, when a new asset is detected, when a new vulnerability is detected. So that's the RACI model. That's is very, very key. And you need to have like a clearly defined process, right? Clearly defined process who needs to get engaged based on the R&R that was defined in your organization. And also, it's very important to measure the metrics, right? Like, how do you actually measure against some of the benchmarks or the industry best practices? Like, at the point of inflection, when you detect something, like how quickly can you actually update your CMDB, and how quickly can you actually connect all these different dots, right? So that's something that needs to be measured, because let's say when a 0 day is happening or something equivalent is happening, right? How quick are your response teams? How quick are your processes to address these particular gaps that might exist?
I guess before I wrap up with you, I like asking this question of technology leaders, because it's just interesting to hear everyone's point of view when it comes to fear of missing out, FOMO. And technology. Obviously, we all hear about these great things, and we're all, technologists. You get excited, or your mind starts thinking how it can help, how it could benefit the company. How do you keep technology FOMO in check? How do you handle that?
I mean, there are so many different forums that exist these days. I mean, obviously you have a big conference like RSA and Black Hat itself, right? But also leveraging like the B-sides, which is a different thing where it's not like a marketing thing, but it's more of practitioners coming together and sharing what they are doing and what their challenges are on, right? And you tap into those particular feedback loops and try to see, oh, what am I missing, right? Am I missing something in my VM, or I'm missing something in my cloud adoption, or securing my cloud or application itself, right? And what are the new trends, right? So you tap into like the industry best practices. You tap into other peers that exist, not just in your own vertical, right, but also in other verticals, and also look at what are the trends in terms of like what are the new capabilities that exist in the market, right? And obviously, as the most of the security programs are maturing, there is a potential for tool consolidation. Looking at, if I was using solution A for doing 1 and 2, and another solution 2 for doing 3 and 4, there might be a possibility that a solution 2 might be able to do like 1, 2, 3, 4. So you always have to actually have like that feedback loop open for suggestion itself.
I like that. That's actually a good way to view it. If somebody wants to touch base with you and pick your brain on anything you talked about on the podcast, what's a good way of doing that?
I think LinkedIn is definitely the right.
Okay. We'll make sure your LinkedIn is in the show notes. Aruneesh, thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing. I hopefully everyone learned a little bit more about, where ASM is and how the company could benefit from it.
Thanks for having me, Amir. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. That's it for this episode. We'll be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, if you found the episode interesting, please share it with somebody else. That's how the podcast has grown. Like, subscribe, leave a review wherever you are listening to this. And I appreciate that very much. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.